But today I want to talk about innovation, tourism, enterprise, public-private sector partnership relationships, or as we say, I heard P3, but I like to think as an economist and P cubed, because it's important you see it in that particular light. What's the essence of this public-private sector partnership? In truth and in fact, as we talk about public-private sector partnership, we have to talk about a scenario whereby the public sector and the private sector work hand in hand. There's no question about that. I think too often in the Caribbean, public sector and the private sector seem to be like ships sailing in the night. They're passing each other. But if we are going to move forward in a very positive and progressive way, both sectors have to work together, and that partnership is critical and essential. We therefore have to revision our relationships. We see a new perspective going forward and move in a concerted manner to ensure that all of us are on the same path. All of us are on the same cutting edge of change. Because if we don't do that, we are going to harm ourselves. I have had the opportunity to travel virtually all over the world. And I see in every country, whether it is China, Morocco, or Turkey, which I've been in the last 4 years, that those individuals, those countries are working together. Too often we feel that when we get in government, we know more than what we did before, and we don't listen to anybody. And of course, sometimes, that continues for a long period of time and nothing happens. We have to rethink where we want to go in the world. Reactive strategies are no longer things to take into consideration. We have to have proactive strategies. Where do we want to go? I met a gentleman at a conference in Hong Kong, and I was asking him about development in China, mainland, and he said, for the last 300 years, we made mistakes in our development, but for the next 3,000 years, we're not going to make any mistakes. Now, we in the Caribbean don't even think 5 years in terms of development. So we have to think long term, because if we're not thinking long term, we're really shortchanging ourselves. What's the emblematic of the past and the programmatic of the future? We know things can work best if we put ourselves and think in the long term. It is likely to create new significant opportunities if we continue in a public-private sector framework, not taking credit for one thing as opposed to the other. It is a major part or way of being on the cutting edge of change. We can't think these days along a linear path. It has to be exponential, hence my term P cubed. It has to be exponential because developments are moving so fast that we don't know really what is hitting us. You may know that Apple came out with, what did Apple come out with recently? All right, and if you don't have that, put in your order. But remember, it's only about 10 years ago those things came on stream. Someone said the other day that the jobs that we now know today, in 5 years' time, will not be in existence. So we have to develop environmental scanning and get in terms of what we want to do in our industry. We have to develop a historical perspective of practical effectiveness. I say think as if there's no box. People say think outside the box. Who tell us there's a box? Let us think as if there's no box at all to box us in. Because when you think about the box, you're contained. You're in a cocoon, as it were. So I like to think as if there's no box. Flip it upside down, change the perspective, and move forward. Do not see size as a constraint to survival. We may be small in the Caribbean, but size has nothing to do with survival. Size has nothing to do with the ability that we have. I mean, think of small St. Lucia, 2 Nobel laureates thus far, and there could be others. So again, I want to believe that even though we are small, and we may be handicapped in some respects, that we could, if we really want to, move our country forward, and has to be located and sourced in the context of the public-private sector partnership. Tourism is an international service. A country can gain only, it is assumed, if its neighbors lose. But of course, we know that is not true. Countries should try to be self-sufficient in all goods and services. But if you're self-sufficient in all goods and services, it means that you may not trade, and trade is critical. Only those countries, however, with the highest productivity levels will gain. And I think sometimes in the Caribbean, we forget that there's a word called productivity. So we go to a business or we go to an office and we see people watching the clock or trying to see how quickly that they can go home. And of course, if our productivity is not up to par, all of us will suffer. Culture and our economies. And I'm just doing a little plug here. This is my director of Virgin Islands Caribbean Cultural Center, Dr. Chenzira Kahina. We believe that culture is critical. It is time to focus on the culture of the region and put in place necessary and sufficient boosts for cultural industries. We have music, we have foods, we have films, we have plays, and our social demeanor, how we say and do things. We have cricket, and we're marking it now, 2020. It took a gentleman to bring that to this part of the world. We can use the things that we have, because sometimes we take them for granted. It is likely to be mutually advantageous to both the public and private sector if we use all of these things. And I'm very much into the whole notion of intellectual property rights. It is said that intellectual property contributes about 4% to 10% of our gross domestic product. We go around the Caribbean and we see people selling our music. A classic example in my first novel is just 283 pages, and the students at a given university, not my university of course, well, they were photocopying the book. It was costing them 20 cents per page, so they were paying more to photocopy the book than buying the book, which was $10. Intellectual property is very, very important. We have to look at our marginal benefits and marginal costs. The benefits experienced from an increase in activity is called the marginal benefits. But of course, it is vital that in institutionalization of the public-private sector partnership, that the marginal benefits and the marginal costs must be considered. The cost of an increase in activity is the marginal cost, and of course cost with a T, not COS. In this new view of the public-private sector partnership, what is also crucial is the social benefits. So what are the actions and reactions and the need for cooperation? The market mechanism is vital in the public-private sector partnership. There's no question about that. Now, of course, there are some problems with the market, but of course we can work on those things. Policies that promote the highest rate of economic growth are not always unambiguously improve the distribution of income. This is a serious issue because as we talk about tourism as a critical component, we have to get our people involved in tourism. I think too often many of our people believe that tourism is only making up a bed. What about the back areas? What about the accountants? What about the general managers, etc.? But we also have to recognize that tourism is service and not servility. I can give you some jokes about how sometimes we've been treated around the region, but I don't think it would take more than 10 minutes. Improvement in productivity. We have to look at micro differences in productivity. Sometimes a small thing can have a macro impact. A very small thing can have a very macro impact. Productivity is the situation where output increases as far as workers are concerned. The length of time it takes to go through our airports, the length of time it takes our immigration and custom officers to pass us through, it's really sometimes problematic. It retards tourism because that is what you remember. So we have to do something about that. I can't understand in areas where most of the tourism, as it goes through immigration and custom, most of that is now computerized. But I'm seeing all people taking 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 minutes before you can move through. Going through China the other day, in Shanghai, as you go up to the officer, first of all, your picture is there, and then there's a comment to say, how did I do? And it takes, we're on a 747, and in a short period, all of you are off. If I'm on my favorite airline, it's taking me about 3 hours to get off the plane because the bus did not come, or it was raining, and as one instance happened, the pilot forgot his passport in Antigua, and he could not come into the Virgin Islands. This has literally happened. The way we answer our phones, the attitude we take when we're serving others, All those things may be micro, but they have a macro impact. Capital availability in the public-private sector partnership. In all countries in the region, the private-public sector should see these relationships as mutually beneficial. A new gross domestic product form. We have to look again at cultural industries as a new form. An UNCTAD study stated that cultural industries around the world will grow at 10% per annum over the next several decades. In the UK, culture and creative industries add 8% to the gross domestic product and employ about 2 million people. In the USA, culture and the creative industries add 6%. We've had a study done for us here in the region, and in Jamaica, it's about 7 to 9% in cultural industries, its contribution to GDP. The copyright-based industries in the United States account for $89 billion, copyright. Of course, you know, we have to get into that and appreciate what that means. Another look at our cultural industries. If we look at our cultural industries, we have to recognize that they are vital as far as our persons are concerned, or people are concerned, and the need for us to locate ourselves in a world, because real and meaningful partnerships between the public and private sectors can only have significant impacts if we see ourselves as taking part in this whole scenario. We are rich in sunshine, sand, sea, but we really exploit them. UNCTAD stated that of 132 developing countries, 64% or 85% of them do not have a film about their country. So you don't know about the country. And when you go on the web, you see all kinds of things about your country which you did not put there. The developing countries account for about 3% of the world's paintings and 4% of the world's sculptures. We have the talent, let us use the talent. What's forward-looking? Where do we go? Henry David Thoreau said, "What lies behind us and what lies ahead of us are tiny compared to what lies within us." There's a lot within us. The private and public sectors in the Caribbean must immerse themselves in the greater phases of external competition because it is fierce. We cannot say stop the world we want to get off. We have to be on that particular action plan going forward. So, there's a need for programmatic diplomacy between the private and public sector. We cannot afford to continue to fight each other. We all have to work together. The game of majoring in minor things must be taken off the agenda of dialogue. Linear development should give way to digital development in an exponential space. We can't use the old Cartesian approach, straight line, because things are happening fast. Within 10 years, things are happening. Within 5 years, things are happening. Globalization is demanding it, and we have to segue ourselves in that process. But we should not let globalization put us on the periphery. Thinking as if there is no box. The relationship between the private sector and the public sector must be seen as a magnet of change. Time is of the essence. All zones of possible agreements, ZOPAs as we call them, must be such that the benefit of the entire society is optimized and no one group is hurt in the process. This motif of the working relationship between the public and private sector should be timeless. Our societies are here forever, not for a period of time. The rationale for the PPP. The size of the labor force is small. Labor force skills and trainings are inadequate. The amount of consumption goods we produce is narrow. Our current technology lacks depth and is limited in its penetration. We have to bridge the digital divide in tourism. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for any questions you may have.